In the heart of the summer, 4 college friends, Jake, Sarah, Liam, and Emily, were buzzing with excitement as they loaded their camping gear into an old SUV. They were bound for a weekend getaway in the remote Blackwood Forest, a place known for its unspoiled beauty and tranquil isolation. The idea was simple: escape the city, disconnect from the digital world, and revel in the wilderness. As they drove through winding roads flanked by dense forests, laughter and music filled the car. The scenic journey was a visual feast, with the lush greenery painting a picture of serenity and adventure. They joked about leaving behind the comforts of modern life, their spirits high with anticipation. Upon arriving at a picturesque clearing in the heart of the forest, they set up camp. The air was fresh, the chirping of birds a welcome soundtrack. As they pitched their tents and prepared a makeshift fire pit, the forest around them seemed to embrace their presence, its vastness a stark contrast to their urban routines. As dusk fell, the friends gathered around the crackling campfire, the orange glow illuminating their faces. They roasted marshmallows and shared stories, the kind of tales told under a starry sky. In these moments, the forest seemed magical, a haven from the outside world. However, unbeknownst to them, the ancient woods of Blackwood Forest were home to more than just wildlife. Legends whispered of the Phobospectre, a spectral creature born from the depths of human fears. It was said to dwell in the shadows, an unseen predator that fed on the terror of those who ventured into its domain. In the comforting glow of the fire, the friends laughed off scary stories and the absurdity of forest monsters. But as the night deepened, so did the shadows around them. The forest, with its rustling leaves and unknown sounds, took on an eerie quality. Unknown to the cheerful group, a pair of glowing eyes watched from the darkness. The Phobospectre, a sinister amalgamation of nightmarish features, lurked nearby, drawn to the fears simmering beneath their jovial surface. It waited patiently, a hunter in the dark, its presence a chilling reminder that some legends have roots in reality. As the fire dwindled and the friends retreated to their tents, the forest reclaimed its silence. But in the depths of Blackwood Forest, the night was far from peaceful. The stage was set for a confrontation between the blissful ignorance of the campers and the ancient, terrifying truth of the Phobospectre. In the dead of night, under the canopy of Blackwood Forest, the only sounds were the whispering breeze and the distant calls of nocturnal creatures. The campsite, bathed in moonlight, was a picture of tranquility. Inside their tents, Jake, Sarah, Liam, and Emily lay asleep, fatigued from the day's escapades. Abruptly, the stillness was shattered. A bizarre cacophony erupted, slicing through the night. It began as a low, guttural growling, morphing into sharp, erratic clicks and whispers, unsettling in their unfamiliarity. Jake's eyes snapped open. He lay still, listening. "Did you guys hear that?" He whispered into the darkness, his voice tinged with apprehension. From another tent, Sarah's sleepy voice responded, muffled by her sleeping bag. "Hear what? It's probably just an animal," she murmured, more to reassure herself than to answer. But the sounds intensified, growing closer, more distinct. The rustling of something large and unseen brushed against the fabric of their tents, casting fleeting shadows in the moonlight. Liam's voice trembled as he spoke. "That doesn't sound like any animal I know." Fear was evident in his words, a stark contrast to the usual bravado he displayed. Emily clutched her sleeping bag tighter, her eyes wide and alert. "Something's out there," she whispered, her voice barely audible. With trepidation, the friends emerged from their tents, clutching flashlights like lifelines. The forest had fallen eerily silent, the strange noises ceasing as suddenly as they had begun. Jake led the way, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. "Okay, that's not normal. We need to check it out," he said, trying to sound brave. They scanned the campsite, their lights revealing little more than the dense trees and their own uneasy faces. Sarah tried to rationalize. Maybe it was just the wind, or a deer. Despite her words, the unease was palpable. The forest, once a haven of natural beauty, now felt alien and menacing. They found nothing amiss, save for a few freshly disturbed branches near their site. Liam, visibly shaken, suggested they return to their tents. "Let's just go back to sleep. It's probably nothing." As they retreated to the perceived safety of their tents, a silent agreement was made to dismiss the incident. Yet, the seed of fear had been sown. The unknown noises had transformed the forest from a place of adventure to a realm of uncertainty and dread. As the first rays of dawn pierced the forest canopy, casting a soft light on the campsite, the group emerged from their tents, still weary from the restless night. The eerie occurrences had left an unsettling pall over them, but the new day brought a sense of temporary relief. While preparing breakfast, Jake noticed something peculiar on the ground. "Hey, come look at this!" he called out, his tone a mix of curiosity and concern. The others gathered around him, their eyes following his gaze. There, etched into the soft earth, were a series of tracks unlike any they had seen before. These were not the familiar prints of forest animals. The tracks were larger, with a strange, almost deliberate pattern, as if something had paced around their campsite. Sarah, ever the rational one, tried to dismiss it. "Maybe it's just a large animal like a bear," she suggested, though her voice lacked conviction. Liam crouched down for a closer look, tracing the outline of one print with his finger. "These don't look like any bear tracks I've seen. And look here." He pointed to a spot where the tracks seemed to vanish. It's as if whatever made these just disappeared into thin air. Emily shivered, wrapping her arms around herself. "This is getting weird. First the noises last night, and now this. Are we sure we want to stay here?" The discovery cast a new shadow over their adventure. The forest, with its towering trees and dappled sunlight, suddenly felt less welcoming, more concealing. The tracks led off into the woods, disappearing among the underbrush, as if beckoning them to follow. Jake stood up, a determined look on his face. "I say we check it out. If there's something strange in these woods, we should find out what it is." But his suggestion was met with hesitation. The mystery of the tracks, combined with the unsettling events of the previous night, had sown seeds of doubt and fear. The group was torn between curiosity and the instinctual urge to leave the forest and its secrets behind. In the end, the decision to stay and investigate would set them on a path deeper into the unknown, drawing them closer to the heart of the forest's hidden terrors. The Phobospectre, a specter of their fears, watched silently from the shadows, its presence an unseen but palpable force in the wilds of Blackwood Forest. As the day progressed, the tension that had simmered beneath the surface of the group's camaraderie began to boil over. The strange occurrences in the forest had frayed their nerves, and what started as playful banter in the morning turned into snappy retorts and thinly veiled accusations by afternoon. While hiking, Jake insisted on leading the group, convinced he had a better sense of direction. "Trust me, I know where I'm going," he declared, his voice laced with irritation. Sarah, however, was skeptical. "Jake, we've been walking in circles. Admit it, we're lost," she countered, her patience wearing thin. Their bickering escalated, drawing in the others. Liam, trying to play peacemaker, suggested they stop for a break. "Let's just calm down and figure this out together," he said, attempting to defuse the situation. But his words fell on deaf ears. Emily, already on edge from the unexplained tracks and the lingering fear of the previous night, snapped at Liam. "Oh, so now you're the voice of reason? Where was this when we decided to stay after finding those creepy tracks?" The group fell into a sullen silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The camaraderie that had once bound them now seemed fragile, easily shattered by fear and the unknown. Their shared glances were no longer filled with excitement, but with suspicion and doubt. As they trudged through the forest, the once vibrant chatter and laughter were replaced with the sounds of their uneasy footsteps. The Phobospectre, an embodiment of their fears, loomed unseen, its presence amplifying the growing rifts among the friends. The day wore on, and the minor disagreements continued. Decisions about where to set up camp, what to eat, and even trivial matters like who would gather firewood became sources of contention. The forest, with its all-encompassing canopy and hidden dangers, seemed to press in on them, magnifying every word, every glance. By nightfall, the group sat around the campfire, their conversation stilted and forced. The joy of the first night's storytelling was gone, replaced by a heavy air of unease. Each friend retreated into their own shell, pondering the strange turn their adventure had taken, and the lurking fear that something more sinister was at play in Blackwood Forest. The next day, in an attempt to ease the tension and salvage their trip, the group decided to explore a different part of the forest. As they hiked through the dense underbrush, the conversation was minimal, their earlier camaraderie replaced by a strained silence. Unexpectedly, they stumbled upon a clearing where an old, abandoned cabin stood. It was a stark contrast to the surrounding wilderness, with its peeling paint and overgrown ivy. The sight of the cabin momentarily united the group in curiosity. Hesitantly, they approached the cabin. The door was slightly ajar, creaking ominously as they pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the smell of decay. The dim light filtering through the dirty windows cast eerie shadows across the room. The walls were covered in odd symbols, crudely etched into the wood, creating an unsettling atmosphere. Sarah, who had an interest in folklore, remarked that the symbols seemed to be some form of ancient runes, though their exact meaning was unclear. In one corner of the cabin, they found a stack of old, faded photographs. As they sifted through them, a sense of unease grew. The photos depicted the cabin in different eras, but in each one, the same unsettling symbols were visible. Some photos showed groups of people, their expressions solemn, standing around what appeared to be a ritualistic arrangement in the forest. Liam, trying to lighten the mood, joked, "Looks like we found the local party spot from way back." But his humor fell flat, overshadowed by the cabin's oppressive aura. One photo in particular caught Emily's attention. It was an image of the cabin, much newer than the others, but with a shadowy figure standing in the background. The figure was blurry, but its presence was distinctly ominous. "Guys, look at this!" Emily said, her voice laced with anxiety. The group gathered around, and the air grew heavy as they all looked at the mysterious figure. The discovery of the cabin and the photos added a new layer of mystery and fear to their trip. It was as if they had uncovered a piece of the forest's dark history, a history that suddenly felt alive and all too real. As they left the cabin, a chilling breeze swept through the clearing, as if the forest itself was reacting to their intrusion. The rest of the hike back to the camp was filled with unspoken questions and fears. What was the history behind the cabin? Who were the people in the photographs? And most importantly, was the forest hiding something more sinister than just legends and old buildings? As evening descended upon Blackwood Forest, a thick fog began to roll in from the direction of the lake, enveloping the campsite in a ghostly mist. The friends had gathered around the campfire, its flickering flames casting a warm glow against the creeping chill of the night. The events of the past few days hung heavily in the air, their laughter and chatter noticeably subdued. Jake was the first to notice something amiss. He peered into the fog, his brows furrowed. "Do you see that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The others turned to look. At first, they saw nothing but the dense fog and the dark outline of the trees. But then, as if materializing from the mist itself, a shadowy figure appeared in the distance. It was difficult to make out its form, but two glowing eyes shone through the fog, fixed intently on their campsite. Sarah clutched her sweater tighter around her. "What is that?" she murmured, her voice tinged with fear. The figure stood motionless, save for the eerie glow of its eyes. It seemed to be observing them, its presence both menacing and inscrutable. Liam reached for a flashlight and shone it towards the figure, but the light seemed to get swallowed by the fog, failing to reveal any more details. "This is getting too creepy," he said, his usual composure slipping. Emily backed away, her eyes still fixed on the glowing eyes. "It's like it's watching us, judging us," she whispered. The figure remained for a few moments longer before it slowly receded into the fog, disappearing from view as silently as it had appeared. The group sat in stunned silence, the crackling of the fire the only sound. The encounter had left them unnerved, the reality of their situation settling in. They were not alone in these woods, and the feeling of being watched lingered long after the figure had vanished. As they retreated into their tents for the night, the comfort they once found in being together in the wilderness was replaced by a sense of vulnerability. The forest, shrouded in fog and mystery, held secrets that they were now all too aware of. The unknown figure with its glowing eyes had become another piece in the unsettling puzzle of Blackwood Forest. The morning after the eerie encounter with the shadowy figure, the group decided to leave Blackwood Forest. The trip, once an exciting adventure, had turned into a series of unnerving experiences they were eager to leave behind. Packing their gear with a sense of urgency, they headed to where their SUV was parked at the edge of the clearing. Jake was the first to reach the car. He put the key in the ignition, turning it expectantly. But instead of the engine roaring to life, there was only a series of weak sputters followed by silence. He tried again, his attempts growing more frantic, but the car refused to start. "Great, just great," Jake muttered, slamming his hand on the steering wheel in frustration. Sarah pulled out her phone, hoping to call for help, but her face fell as she checked the screen. "No signal," she announced, her voice laced with worry. The others checked their phones, only to be met with the same result. The realization that they were stranded hit them hard. The forest, once a symbol of escape, now felt like a trap closing in on them. Their only link to the outside world, the car, was unresponsive, and without cell service, they couldn't call for assistance. Liam popped the hood of the car, hoping it was a problem he could fix. But as he peered into the engine, it was clear that the issue was beyond his basic knowledge of car mechanics. Emily paced back and forth, trying to keep panic at bay. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice tinged with fear. They discussed their options. Walking back to the nearest town was risky. They barely had any supplies, and the forest had already proven to be unpredictable and dangerous. Waiting by the car for someone to find them seemed equally daunting. As they stood there, a heavy sense of isolation weighed on them. The forest loomed large around them, its dense trees and deep shadows a constant reminder of their vulnerability. The sounds of nature, once comforting, now seemed ominous, as if the forest was watching and waiting. The group huddled together, trying to devise a plan. The sense of adventure that had brought them to Blackwood Forest had vanished, replaced by a desperate desire to return to safety and normalcy. But the forest, with its deep secrets and unseen watchers, was not ready to release them yet. The Phobospectre, a silent observer of their plight, continued its unseen torment, feeding off their growing fear and desperation. As night fell over Blackwood Forest, the isolation and fear that had been building within the group reached a feverish peak. Stranded and with no way to call for help, the friends gathered around the campfire, their faces reflecting the flickering flames and the growing terror in their hearts. It started with Emily. As she stared into the fire, the flames began to morph and twist, taking on the shape of spider-like creatures crawling towards her. She let out a sharp gasp, scrambling back, her eyes wide with horror. "They're everywhere!" she cried out, swatting at the ground and air around her. The others looked on in confusion, seeing nothing but the ordinary fire before them. Jake reached out to comfort her, but she recoiled from his touch, trapped in her hallucination. Next, it was Sarah. She gazed into the darkness beyond the firelight, and her breath hitched in her throat. The trees around them seemed to bend and warp, turning into towering figures that reached out with long, skeletal fingers. She whispered in a trembling voice, "They're closing in on us. We're surrounded." Liam, in an attempt to rationalize their experiences, insisted they were just on edge. But even as he spoke, his own fears began to manifest. The shadows cast by the fire grew darker, coalescing into the form of a large, growling beast, its eyes glowing in the dark. Liam froze, his voice faltering as he stared into the eyes of his nightmare. Finally, Jake, who had been trying to keep everyone calm, felt a cold sensation creeping up his spine. Turning around, he saw figures emerging from the forest, their faces obscured and their movements slow and deliberate. They were the specters of his childhood fears, the monsters he believed lurked in every dark corner. The friends were caught in their own personal hells, each experiencing vivid and terrifying hallucinations that played on their deepest fears. The once familiar and comforting campsite had transformed into a nightmarish landscape, fueled by their anxieties and the malevolent presence of the Phobospectre. The group was torn apart by their individual terrors, unable to comfort or even comprehend what the others were seeing. Their panic was palpable, each reacting in their own way. Emily trying to flee from her imagined spiders, Sarah huddling in on herself, Liam backing away from the shadowy beast, and Jake shouting at the ghostly figures to stay back. As the hallucinations intensified, so did their sense of despair and helplessness. The forest, with its unseen menace and its ability to prey on their fears, seemed to close in around them, a prison from which there was no escape. The night dragged on, each moment an eternity, as they struggled against the horrors conjured by their own minds and the sinister influence of the Phobospectre. In the pale light of dawn, after a night tormented by hallucinations, the group decided to venture deeper into the forest in search of help or a way out. As they trudged through the underbrush, their bodies weary and spirits frayed, they stumbled upon a small, hidden clearing. In the center stood a rudimentary cabin, its existence seemingly unknown to the rest of the world. Approaching cautiously, they were greeted by an old man with a weathered face and piercing eyes. He introduced himself as Elias, a hermit who had lived in the forest for many years. Inviting them in with a gesture, his demeanor was a blend of wariness and curiosity. Inside the cabin, amidst an array of ancient books and odd trinkets, Elias listened to their tale. When they mentioned the Phobospectre, his expression grew solemn. He began to recount the legend of the creature, a tale steeped in the history of Blackwood Forest. Long ago, Elias began, his voice low and steady. The forest was home to a spirit guardian, a protector of nature's balance. But as time passed and the world outside changed, the spirit grew twisted and vengeful, feeding off the fears of those who entered its domain. He explained that the Phobospectre was no ordinary creature. It was a manifestation of the forest's dark energy and the collective fears of those who ventured into its depths. It preys on your anxieties, your nightmares, bringing them to life, he said, his eyes reflecting the flicker of his fireplace. The forest and the Phobospectre are one, Elias continued. To escape its grasp, you must confront not just the creature, but the fears it uses against you. The Phobospectre is a mirror, reflecting the darkest corners of your mind. The group listened, a mix of skepticism and dawning comprehension on their faces. The hallucinations, the feeling of being watched, the sense of dread, it all connected back to the Phobospectre. Elias offered them a piece of advice. Find the heart of the forest, the place where the spirit was born. Only there can you confront the Phobospectre and break its hold over you. As they left the hermit's cabin, a new resolve took hold. The group, now armed with the knowledge of their foe, set out to find the heart of the forest. The path ahead was fraught with uncertainty, but understanding the nature of their enemy gave them a glimmer of hope. The Phobospectre, a creature of fear and shadows, awaited them, its power rooted in the very fears they had to overcome. Gathered in a small clearing, the group huddled together, their faces etched with determination. The revelations from Elias, the hermit, had ignited a flicker of hope amidst their fear. They knew now that to escape Blackwood Forest and the grasp of the Phobospectre, they had to confront the very fears that fueled it. For Jake, the air before him rippled, and out of the shadows emerged figures resembling his family. But their eyes were empty, their expressions twisted in disappointment and accusation. They spoke in unison, voicing his fear of failing those he loved most. Jake, his heart pounding, closed his eyes and remembered happy moments with his family, their love and support. As he opened his eyes and stepped forward, the figures dissolved into mist, his fear losing its grip. Sarah was next. The ground around her turned into a representation of her future, filled with paths that led to dead ends and cliffs. Voices whispered of missed opportunities and failures, playing on her fear of not achieving her dreams. Drawing a deep breath, Sarah mentally recounted her accomplishments and the hurdles she had already overcome. With each step she took, the paths brightened, leading to open skies and new horizons, and the taunting voices faded away. Liam's surroundings darkened, and he found himself seemingly alone, an expanse of emptiness around him, embodying his fear of isolation and abandonment. The silence was deafening. Liam, fighting the rising panic, focused on the memories of laughter and camaraderie with his friends. Gradually, the darkness receded, and the sounds of the forest returned, reaffirming his connection to those around him. Finally, it was Emily's turn. Her fear materialized as a monstrous version of herself, its voice echoing her insecurities and doubts. It loomed over her, but Emily stood her ground. She recalled moments of her strength and resilience, facing the creature with a defiance that grew with every word it spoke. As her confidence swelled, the creature shrank, its form becoming insubstantial until it vanished like a bad dream. With each confrontation, the oppressive aura of the Phobospectre waned. The friends, having faced and overcome their deepest fears, had broken the creature's hold over them. The forest, sensing the shift, seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. As the Phobospectre faded into the shadows of the trees, a sense of catharsis washed over the group. They had not only survived the night, but had emerged stronger, their bonds solidified through shared adversity. The heart of the forest, once a place of darkness and fear, now stood bathed in the soft, reassuring light of dawn. As the first light of dawn broke through the canopy of Blackwood Forest, the group, victorious in their confrontation with the Phobospectre, faced a somber reality. The night's harrowing events had left their mark, and not all of them had emerged unscathed. In the aftermath of the showdown, they discovered that Liam, who had bravely faced his fear of isolation, had succumbed to injuries sustained during the ordeal. His loss was a heavy blow, casting a pall over their hard-won triumph. The friends, now 3, gathered around Liam in a silent, tearful farewell, struggling to come to terms with the price of their escape. The decision to leave the forest, a place that had tested their limits and taken one of their own, was fraught with a mix of relief and sorrow. As they prepared to leave, each survivor took a moment to reflect on the journey that had brought them to this point. Jake, carrying the weight of leadership, felt the burden of responsibility for his friend's safety. Sarah, the rational thinker of the group, was haunted by the what-ifs and the choices they had made. Emily, who had shown remarkable courage, grappled with the guilt of surviving, while her friend had not. Together, they made their way out of the heart of the forest, their steps heavy with loss. The once intimidating trees now seemed to stand in silent homage to their ordeal, the morning light casting long shadows on the path. As they reached the edge of the forest, the reality of the outside world began to set in. They knew they would have to explain Liam's absence, a task that none of them were prepared for. The ordeal in the forest had changed them in ways they couldn't yet fully understand. Their escape from Blackwood Forest was not a triumphant return, but a bittersweet emergence back into a world that seemed far removed from the horrors they had faced. The memories of their experiences, both terrifying and transformative, would remain with them, a haunting reminder of the fragility of life and the strength found in facing one's deepest fears. The Phobospectre, a manifestation of those fears, remained a shadowy legend within the depths of the forest, its existence intertwined with the mysteries of Blackwood Forest, a chilling tale for those who dared to venture too close.